Claire Bennett lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, the kind of place where the mornings were filled with the sound of birds and the distant hum of passing cars. Her husband, Mark, worked as a regional manager for a construction company, often traveling for days at a time. It wasn't unusual for Claire to spend most of her evenings alone, the house silent except for the ticking clock and the steady rhythm of her thoughts. On one such morning, she noticed something wrong in the kitchen. The sink wasn't draining properly. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just a bit of buildup, but soon the water started pooling. Frustrated, she sighed and opened the cabinet under the sink, peering into the dark space filled with pipes she didn't understand. Claire had never been handy. Mark usually handled these things, but with him away, she felt the weight of small problems more than usual after a few failed attempts with a plunger and a bottle of drain cleaner. She gave up and decided to call for help. She searched online and found a local handyman named Ethan Walker. The reviews described him as reliable, friendly, and the kind of guy who goes above and beyond. Without overthinking it, she dialed the number, Walker Repairs. A calm male voice answered. "Hi," she said, trying to sound casual. "My kitchen sink seems to be clogged, and I could really use someone who knows what they're doing." "I can be there in about an hour," he replied. "What's the address?" Claire gave him the details and hung up, then quickly tidied the kitchen. She wasn't sure why she cared how the place looked. It wasn't like this was anything more than a plumbing call, but she still found herself wiping counters and lighting a faintly scented candle near the window. Exactly an hour later, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found a man in his mid-30s standing there with a calm smile. He had clear blue eyes, a few days' stubble, and wore a navy work shirt with his name stitched over the pocket. "You must be Mrs. Bennett," he said politely. "I'm Ethan." "Please call me Claire," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. Ethan walked to the kitchen, setting down his toolbox. "So, what seems to be the problem?" She explained the situation while he crouched down to inspect the pipes. His movements were confident and steady, the kind that came from years of practice. He asked a few short questions about when the clog started. And as he worked, the two of them began to talk. Claire wasn't usually chatty with strangers, but something about Ethan made her feel at ease. Maybe it was his calm tone or the way he listened attentively when she spoke. She learned he had grown up in a small town nearby, started his own repair business a few years ago, and loved the simplicity of fixing things with his hands. "I like it," he said with a light smile. "Every house has its own little story. I just get to be the one who keeps it running." Claire laughed softly. "That's a nice way to look at it." He glanced up at her. "And what about you? What's your story?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Oh, nothing that interesting. I work part-time at the library. It's quiet, peaceful." Ethan nodded. "Quiet can be good." Then, after a small pause, he added, "But too much quiet can start to feel heavy sometimes, can't it?" His words struck her more deeply than she expected. It was as though he had reached into her thoughts. Claire smiled faintly, but didn't answer. She didn't need to. He seemed to understand anyway. As Ethan continued working, Claire made coffee and handed him a cup. The smell filled the room, warm and comforting. They talked about books, movies, and even shared a few laughs over bad home repair stories. The conversation felt natural, effortless. And for the first time in a long while, Claire felt like herself again, not just someone's wife, not just a caretaker of an empty house, but a woman who could still connect and laugh. After an hour, Ethan stood up and turned on the faucet. The water ran smoothly, no gurgling, no clogs. "All fixed," he said, wiping his hands with a small towel. "That was fast," Claire said. "Not too bad," he replied, giving her a quick grin. "Old pipes, but still strong. Just needed the right touch." She smiled at that. "Thank you, Ethan, really. Just doing my job," he said, though his tone carried a hint of warmth that made her heart stir a little before leaving. Ethan gathered his tools but lingered a second longer near the doorway. "If anything else acts up," he said softly, "don't wait too long to call. Sometimes small things turn big if you ignore them." Claire laughed lightly. "I'll remember that." After he left, she stood in the kitchen for a while, staring at the now perfectly working sink. It was strange, but the house didn't feel as empty as it had that morning. There was a lingering sense of comfort, as if his calm presence had left something behind. That evening, she sat on the couch with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the fading sunlight. Her thoughts drifted back to Ethan, not in any inappropriate way, but more out of curiosity. He seemed grounded, kind, and genuine, qualities she hadn't seen much of lately. She thought about how easy it had been to talk to him, how he listened without trying to fix her problems. When Mark called later that night, she smiled as she answered, but their conversation was brief, more about logistics than emotion. After hanging up, she realized how much she missed real conversation, the kind that made her feel heard. The next morning, found herself thinking about Ethan again. Not intentionally, but his words kept echoing in her mind. Too much quiet can start to feel heavy. He had been right. Her days had become quiet to the point of loneliness, filled with chores, reading, and waiting for the phone to ring. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself she was just being silly. But later that afternoon, when she went to rinse her hands, the water pressure dipped again. She laughed softly to herself, shaking her head. Maybe the sink really wasn't fixed, or maybe life had just given her an excuse to hear that calm, steady voice again. Claire picked up her phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing. Walker Repairs, the familiar voice answered. "Hi, Ethan. It's Claire Bennett again," she said, her tone light. "I think the sink's giving me trouble again." There was a short pause, then a friendly chuckle. "Guess it missed me already. I'll swing by tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Claire leaned against the counter, feeling an unexpected mix of anticipation and nervousness. She told herself it was just about fixing the sink, nothing more. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. That night, as rain tapped gently on the windows, Claire lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a while, she wasn't thinking about her husband's next trip or her empty house. Instead, she was thinking about a man who had walked into her kitchen with a wrench and left her with questions she couldn't quite name. The next morning would bring another visit, another conversation, another chance to understand why she couldn't stop replaying his voice in her mind. She didn't know it yet, but that simple repair call had quietly set something in motion, a small, invisible shift that would change the way she looked at her life, her choices, and herself. Claire sighed, finally closing her eyes. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd get the sink fixed again. But maybe, just maybe, she was hoping for something else. A reason to feel something different, something alive. And so, with the hum of the rain outside and the faint hope of morning ahead, Claire drifted to sleep, unaware that the man who came to fix her sink had already begun fixing something deeper within her. The next morning, Claire woke up with a mix of anticipation and unease. She told herself it was only a sink repair, but the truth was more complicated. She found herself thinking about Ethan, the calm, reliable man who had made a simple plumbing call feel like something more, a conversation, a connection, a glimpse of life beyond her routine. By 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She opened it to find Ethan standing there, toolbox in hand, his easy smile immediately filling the threshold. "Good morning, Claire. Ready for round two?" he said, his voice warm and light. "More than ready," she replied, stepping aside. Her kitchen suddenly felt smaller, cozier, and the quiet of her empty house seemed less oppressive. As Ethan got to work, Claire observed him closely. He moved with practiced efficiency, yet there was something careful about the way he treated her space. The air smelled faintly of coffee and soap, a comfort that made the silence less intimidating. She poured him a cup of coffee, and he thanked her with a nod, taking a sip before returning to the pipes. "This is trickier than I thought," Ethan muttered, examining the clogged drain with a frown. "Looks like the fittings are older than I expected. Might take longer than I planned." Claire crouched beside him, holding a flashlight over the pipes. "Do you need a hand?" she asked, her voice light, but with a small hope in it. Ethan glanced at her, his expression softening. "Sure, keep the light steady. Thanks. For the next half hour, they worked in silence. The only sounds the occasional clink of a wrench and the hum of the dishwasher in the background. Their shoulders brushed once accidentally and neither moved away. The moment passed without comment, but it lingered, a quiet reminder that connection could be found even in the smallest interactions. Once the pipes were repaired, Ethan stood and stretched. Looks good. Should hold for a while. Claire breathed a sigh of relief. I don't know how I'd manage without you. He smiled faintly. Most people don't realize how much a small fix can mean. She laughed softly. I guess that's true. Ethan lingered by the doorway, looking around the kitchen. The house, filled with sunlight streaming through the windows, felt alive with his presence. Claire realized she had forgotten how much the human touch conversation, laughter. Even the simple act of sharing a space could brighten a day. I don't usually do this, Ethan said after a pause, but would you like to sit for a bit? Have some lunch? I brought a few sandwiches in case you didn't have time. Claire blinked. She hadn't expected an invitation. She glanced at the neatly packed sandwiches and then at the man standing before her. There was something disarming about his genuine demeanor, something that made her feel seen without pressure. Sure, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. They sat at the kitchen table, sandwiches in hand, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Ethan spoke about his work repairing homes, the satisfaction of seeing a project completed, and the quiet solitude he usually experienced. Claire listened, realizing how rare it was to talk with someone who didn't ask for anything from her, someone who simply shared stories and listened in return. You know, Ethan said, leaning back slightly, I don't often meet people who appreciate the small details. Most people just want it fixed and then forget I was ever here. But you actually notice the little things. Claire smiled faintly. I notice things. Sometimes too much. He laughed softly. I think that's a good thing. Life's too short to overlook the details. The afternoon passed with light conversation, laughter, and an ease that Claire hadn't felt in a long time. When the clock edged past noon, Ethan finally packed up his tools. Before leaving, he turned to her and said quietly, Claire, you've got a way of making people feel welcome. It's rare. I hope you know that. She felt a warmth in her chest at his words. Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot. He smiled, a small, knowing smile, and stepped toward the door. I'll leave you with the piece of a working sink, and maybe a little more than that, Kay said lightly, and then he was gone. After he left, Claire stood at the counter, staring out the window. The house felt different now. Not just because the sink worked, but because she had experienced something she hadn't felt in years. A genuine connection, uncomplicated by routine, expectation, or obligation. That night, Claire lay in bed, replaying the day's events in her mind. The sound of Ethan's voice, the warmth of his smile, and the quiet way he had listened without judgment filled her thoughts. She told herself it was nothing more than kindness, that he was simply a polite, professional man doing his job. Yet, even as she repeated the mantra in her mind, she couldn't deny the way her heart had responded. The following days were uneventful in appearance. But Claire found herself anticipating something. The rhythm of her household felt slower, quieter, and she realized how much she had missed human connection. Someone who understood her without needing her to explain everything. When she finally went to the kitchen again, she found herself checking the faucet, half expecting to see it misbehaving. The water flowed perfectly, yet she smiled, thinking of Ethan and the effortless way he had entered her life. A week later, she received another knock at the door. Her heart skipped as she opened it to see Ethan standing there, toolbox in hand, with that same calm confidence. Morning, Claire, he said. Looks like the sink's acting up again. She laughed softly. It seems determined to keep me on my toes. Ethan chuckled. Well, I'm here to make sure it doesn't win. The house, filled with morning sunlight, felt warmer with him inside. They moved through the familiar steps of inspecting the pipes. But this time, there was a new ease between them, a familiarity that allowed Claire to relax completely. She noticed how natural it felt to hand him tools, offer guidance, and even share small jokes. The air between them was comfortable, charged with an invisible warmth that neither could ignore but neither directly acknowledged. As he worked, Ethan spoke about his own quiet moments, how he spent evenings alone fixing things, reading, or listening to music, and how sometimes it all felt lonely despite being surrounded by people during the day. Claire felt a strange resonance with his words, a reflection of her own solitude. She shared small details of her life, the library, her quiet afternoons, her longing for something beyond routine by the time the faucet was fully repaired. The sunlight had shifted across the kitchen, casting a soft glow on the counter and their faces. They both stepped back, surveying the work. Ethan smiled, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "Looks like everything's in order," he said. Though the warmth in his tone suggested more than just satisfaction with the sink, Claire nodded, her chest tight. "It's perfect. Thank you." Again. He hesitated at the door, a quiet tension in the air. "Claire, I don't usually say this to clients, but you make these visits memorable. I appreciate your company more than I can say." Her heart skipped, and for a moment, words failed her. I'm glad," she whispered, unsure what else to say. Ethan smiled faintly and finally left. But the impression of his presence lingered long after the door closed. Claire walked to the window, watching him disappear down the street, and realized that something inside her had shifted. It wasn't about romance or infidelity, it was about being seen, being heard, and being reminded that life, even in its quietest moments, could surprise her. That evening, Claire found herself smiling at the memory of Ethan's easy confidence, his laughter, and the way he had made a simple plumbing problem feel like an event worth remembering. She brewed tea and sat by the window, the house still quiet but no longer oppressive. The rhythm of her life had changed, subtly but undeniably, and she felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Claire knew that the next visit, whenever it came, would carry with it the same quiet significance. It was a small, unexpected connection, but in her quiet life, it was enough to stir something deep within her, reminder that life could still hold surprises, warmth, and meaningful encounters in the most unexpected places. She went to bed that night feeling a strange comfort, a sense that her world had expanded just a little, and that even small moments of human kindness could leave a lasting mark. And with that thought, she drifted off to sleep. The sound of rain tapping against the windows mixing with the memory of Ethan's calm, steady presence, a presence that had quietly begun to change her days. The following week, Claire found herself nervously glancing at the clock throughout the morning. She told herself it was silly after all. Ethan was a professional, a handyman, here to fix the sink, nothing more. But there was a flutter in her chest she couldn't ignore. The quiet of her home felt heavier without him, and she realized how much she had come to anticipate his visits, not because of the plumbing, but because of the warmth he brought with him. At precisely 10 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Claire's heart leaped, and she hurried to answer it. Ethan stood there, holding his toolbox and wearing the same calm smile that had made her feel so at ease before. "Good morning, Claire," he said. "I see the sink's still giving you trouble." She laughed softly. "It has a mind of its own. Please, come in." As Ethan moved into the kitchen, Claire noticed how naturally his presence filled the space. He set down his toolbox and crouched to inspect the pipes. The room felt smaller yet warmer somehow, as though the air between them carried an unspoken understanding. Claire held the flashlight for him, and their fingers brushed briefly. The simple contact sent a shiver of awareness down her spine. Subtle yet undeniable, Ethan worked quietly, focused on the task. But every so often he glanced at her with a gentle curiosity. "You're good at this," he said, nodding toward her careful handling of the light and tools. Claire smiled faintly. "I'm learning from the best." Faye shared a laugh, the sound blending with the soft hum of the morning. Conversation flowed naturally, touching on simple things, weekend plans, favorite books, and shared memories of Portland neighborhoods. Claire felt an ease she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't flirtation exactly, but it was warmth, attention, and connection qualities that had become scarce in her quiet life. Suddenly, the faucet sputtered and stopped. Water pooled in the sink, and Claire's heart sank slightly. Ethan immediately moved to the problem, his hands steady and confident. He worked efficiently, explaining what he was doing, but also taking care to engage her in the process. Sometimes even small issues can teach us patience, he said lightly, glancing at her with a knowing smile. Claire nodded. I suppose that's true. While he worked, they shared stories from their childhoods. Ethan spoke about growing up in a small town, learning the value of hard work from his father. Claire shared anecdotes from her life, both humorous and thoughtful, finding that he genuinely listened, reacting with empathy and understanding rather than judgment. The kitchen, once just a space for chores, had become a place of shared experiences and quiet companionship. After about an hour, Ethan stepped back and turned on the faucet. Water flowed perfectly this time, a steady stream reflecting the sunlight streaming through the window. All fixed, he said, a sense of satisfaction in his voice. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It's perfect, she said. Thank you, Ethan. You've done more than just fix a sink. You've made the house feel alive again. Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. That means a lot, Claire. You have a way of seeing life, even in its quiet moments. It's rare. For a moment, silence hung between them, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken understanding. Claire felt her heart stir, realizing that these visits had come to mean more than she had intended. There was no inappropriate thought, no ill intent, just the simple, profound experience of being genuinely acknowledged by another human being. Ethan packed up his tools, but paused at the door. I should go, he said softly, but I want you to know these moments mean something to me too. It's not just work, it's connection. Claire's chest tightened. I know what you mean, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel the same. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries understanding without needing words. Then, with a polite nod, he stepped out the door. Claire watched him walk down the street, feeling a quiet sadness mixed with gratitude. He had entered her life like a gentle breeze, leaving warmth and awareness in his wake. The days that followed were different. Claire noticed small changes in herself. She approached life with a lighter heart, a renewed appreciation for simple interactions, and a growing sense that meaningful connection didn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it came in the form of shared smiles, casual conversations, and the presence of someone attentive and kind. Mark returned home that weekend, and Claire greeted him warmly. But she realized that the experiences with Ethan had reminded her of something important. She needed connection, conversation, and acknowledgement, not only from strangers or friends, but from the people she loved. Her interactions with Ethan hadn't diminished her marriage or her values. They had reminded her of what it meant to be seen, heard, and appreciated as she reflected on the week. Claire realized that life could surprise her in subtle, profound ways. A simple plumbing problem had become a vehicle for emotional growth, for rediscovering joy in everyday moments, and for experiencing genuine human warmth. She smiled, thinking of Ethan, not with longing, but with gratitude for the reminder that even quiet lives could be enriched by small, meaningful encounters. On Sunday afternoon, Claire sat in her kitchen, the faucet running smoothly, sunlight spilling over the counters. She sipped tea and thought about the past week. The sink was fixed, yes, but more importantly, she felt a renewed sense of vitality, an emotional connection she hadn't realized she was missing. Life felt fuller, richer, and more alive. The doorbell rang, and Claire rose, smiling at the familiar sound. She opened the door to find Ethan standing there once again, his toolbox in hand, but this time carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Thought you might like these, he said gently, handing them to her. Claire's eyes softened. They're beautiful. Thank you, Ethan. He shrugged lightly. Just a small gesture. You've made these visits something I look forward to, and I wanted to return the favor. They sat in the kitchen again, the sunlight making the flowers glow softly on the table. Conversation flowed naturally, deeper this time, touching on dreams, aspirations, and the small joys of life that often go unnoticed. Claire realized that these moments were about more than repairs. They were about being present, being attentive, and being reminded that life could be unexpectedly beautiful even in the quietest spaces. As the afternoon waned, Ethan stood to leave. He looked at Claire, a mixture of warmth and understanding in his gaze. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. "And remember, even small connections can make a big difference." Claire smiled, feeling a deep sense of appreciation. "I will. Thank you for everything." As he walked away, Claire closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. She realized that life had shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. A simple visit to fix a sink had grown into an experience that reminded her of the importance of human connection, attentiveness, and the beauty of small gestures. That evening, Claire sat by the window, reflecting on the week. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. She had discovered something she hadn't realized: she was missing genuine, uncomplicated human presence. The encounters with Ethan had reminded her of life's small pleasures, the value of being seen, and the unexpected joy of meaningful interaction. As the sun set, Claire felt a sense of closure and renewal. The sink was fixed, yes, but more importantly, she had been reminded that life was full of surprises, warmth, and the quiet beauty of connection. She smiled, sipping her tea, and felt a calm assurance that even the simplest interactions could leave a lasting impression. For Claire, the week with Ethan had been transformative, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, meaningful ones. She had learned that connection, attentiveness, and kindness could arrive in unexpected forms, and that life, even in its quietest moments, could be richer than she had imagined. As night fell over Portland, Claire went to bed with a light heart, a quiet smile, and a renewed sense of gratitude. The simple act of having a sink repaired had become a journey of emotional growth, a reminder of human warmth, and an affirmation that even small moments could leave a profound mark. And as she drifted off to sleep, she carried with her the quiet knowledge that life's surprises often come when least expected, and that meaningful connection, even in its smallest form, could bring unexpected joy, comfort, and renewal.